I stared death in the face, and for the first time, I saw my true self.
This movie's gonna suck.
Honestly, I don't think there's any studio that confounds me as much as Sony does. One minute they're taking promising projects behind the shed and executing them, like a Gendy Tartovsky Popeye movie, only to then greenlight a movie about goddamn emojis.
Goldfish! Fish cake with swirl!
And just when you think Sony is going through their redemptive arc with masterpieces like Spider-Verse and Mitchell's vs. the Machines, they do things like Morbius and now Kraven. I mean, I guess it's impressive that Sony can put out one of the best superhero movies ever made in the form of Across the Spider-Verse and then follow it up weeks later with a trailer for a movie that looks like one of the worst superhero movies of all time. You know, during my Indiana Jones 5 video, there were some people who got on my case for saying that Indiana Jones 5 looked like shit. Can I say this movie looks like shit? It looks like shit. The slow, awkward action, the ridiculous premise, the mugging for the camera, the random shirtless fuckboy antics, Kraven's ridiculous origin, having Kraven be a brooding anti-hero instead of a supervillain. It all just looks so bad. And when I was watching the trailer, I had the oddest sense of deja vu because it reminded me so much of the Morbius trailer. It hits so many of the same plot beats. Scrawny protagonist is weak and unassuming until they have a tragic accident that gives them superpowers and then they become a shirtless anti-hero hunk. Even their origins seem to be similar, with Kraven getting his powers after being bitten by a lion, while Morbius got his powers after having sex with a bat. You didn't see Morbius, you can't tell if I'm lying or not. How was that little Wikipedia trip you just took?
Kerprank! Ah! You're watching Kerprank!
Although, on the topic of Morbius, I do have to take note of this little detail. This is the movie you break out the blood packs for, not the movie with the actual vampire as the main character. Yeah, okay, Sony, sure, let's see what you're cooking. So, the origin you're going with is that Kraven ends up getting bitten by a magical lion, and then the lion's blood goes into his wound, giving Kraven lion powers. You do realize that Spider-Man's villains don't all have a similar origin to him, yeah? I mean, one of Kraven's whole gimmicks as a supervillain, and one of the things that sets him aside from Spider-Man's other bad guys, is that he didn't really have superpowers. He was a guy who managed to Batman himself to the peak of his physical capabilities. And he would occasionally enhance himself further with serums or magic or whatever else he had to hand. And I have to imagine that Kraven's fans, all 6 of them, aren't exactly thrilled that the title character of this movie bears very little resemblance to Kraven the Hunter.
Who's this guy?
I kid, just a little. I happen to like Kraven quite a lot as a supervillain, and I am more than a little bummed to see him being treated this way. He certainly has more potential as a character than Morbius ever did. And maybe if they had done a movie where Kraven is an actual supervillain instead of a brooding, violent protector of nature, there might have been something at least unique there, but Sony doesn't seem to want to do unique when it comes to their live-action superhero movies. Instead, it seems that Sony wants to turn Kraven into a lamer version of Aquaman and have him do battle with the iconic supervillain, Kraven's dad. Well, actually, the Rhino is apparently going to be a character in this movie. I really like the part in the trailer where he says, "Hey, I'm the fucking Rhino."
Don't you want to know why they call me the Rhino?
This movie's gonna suck.
And worst of all, it's not even a version of the Rhino wearing a suit. It's a gross mutant version of the Rhino. The suit is the absolute best part about the Rhino as a villain, don't even at me. The fact that the best the scriptwriter for this movie could come up with is anti-hero Kraven fights the Rhino is a clear sign that this whole Spider-Man cinematic universe thing is just a bad idea that is never going to work. Or, at least, it's never going to work in its current iteration. I'll give Sony some credit. Starting off with Venom was a really good idea because, well, there's enough to Venom as a character that you can get a lot of movies out of him on his own without Spider-Man. I'll admit I have come around a little bit on the Venom movies in recent times. I don't love them by any stretch of the imagination, but they have grown on me. Tom Hardy has a lot of natural charm, and the way the movies show Venom as this kind of goofy goober, well, it's kind of an endearing concept.
Good evening, Eddie.
Hey, Mrs. Chen.
Good evening, Venom.
He says hi.
And it does show that the director of the Venom movies has an actual idea of what to do with Venom as a character, and that he didn't really need to mangle the character beyond all recognition to make a movie about him. And Venom did have his share of mainstream popularity even before the MCU was a thing. But the rest of these character choices, I mean, what the hell is going on at Sony? Who has ever asked for a movie about Kraven? Who has ever asked for a movie about Morbius, of all characters? I mean, maybe they could try making movies that might have a chance of some mainstream appeal. I know for a fact that I'd watch a movie all about Willem Dafoe's Green Goblin or Alfred Molina's Doc Ock. Considering how hyped for those guys people got when the trailers for No Way Home dropped, it's clear they do have a pre-existing fan base, so hey, that's a place you can start with. Or, I don't know, they could try using a character that's been popular through some mainstream exposure. People really like the Prowler in the Spider-Verse movies, so maybe you could try making a movie about that guy. You can't just say, hey gang, here's a movie about Morbius, and expect the world to get excited when a grand total of 5 people knew who Morbius was before his movie came out. Wait, why on earth am I trying to give movie advice to Sony? They have terrible decision-making skills. The term superhero fatigue tends to get thrown around quite a lot. Really, it's seen use basically since the first Avengers movie came out. Personally speaking, I don't think we're at a point where general audiences are tired of superhero movies per se, but I feel the level of quality has been gradually raised for what people expect of them. I mean, movies like Joker, The Batman, and Across the Spider-Verse are all relatively new superhero movies that received rave reviews and did well at the box office. And each of them was unique in some capacity, breaking away from the mold that the MCU had established. But on the other hand, superhero movies that don't really try anything risky or new, they're starting to struggle a fair bit. DC is on its 3rd flop by now. Of course, it does warm my heart to see that The Flash is doing very poorly. That's what you get for gambling all your hopes on Ezra Miller of all people. My point being, I think it's all too likely that Kraven is going to end up like one of the latter examples, particularly when it seems that Sony hasn't really learned anything since Morbius. This will be, undeniably, one of the movies ever made. But boy howdy, you better keep watching these Sony Spider-Man movies because they are building towards, something. Yeah, let's be entirely honest. No matter how much Sony hints towards it, Disney is never going to allow the MCU Spider-Man to have a millstone like Morbius around his neck in a movie. Because, well, Sony's Spider-Man movies, with the exception of Venom, and the Spider-Verse movies, which are their own thing, they're, box office poison compared to the MCU. And it doesn't help that Tom Holland has been hinting that he's looking to move away from Spider-Man these days. After 3 movies, I can't really say I blame him. And, well, call me crazy, but I can't really imagine Kraven being the movie that's going to be so successful that Disney changes their mind and cashes all their chips in with Sony. This is the kind of terrible, cruel oppression that we Morb heads are more than used to by now.
It's bullshit.